Thank you so much for having me here today. It is truly a privilege to be here. And it is truly a privilege to be here. And as we celebrate FDA approval for RA, and my colleague Emily and I, and my friend, she and I were just talking about how long ago that was when we did that shoot. That was 8 years, and it's pretty crazy to see how far the field has come and how far I've come to in that time. But so I want to talk today about what I've been doing in the last couple of years, but frame it around the idea of loss to follow-up. So in medicine, loss to follow-up describes a patient who disappears from the data. My personal experience defines the concept more like this: an exploration of the unmeasured space after healing, a quiet process of rebuilding identity, purpose, and belonging, and how sometimes the best way to find your way back to yourself is to go get lost for a little while. So to be quite honest, being here today, I feel a little bit like a fish out of water. It's been a couple years since I've given a presentation like this. And it's also been a long time since I used the word patient. And those of you who know me know that I don't do patient very well, not as a noun and certainly not as an adjective. And when I went into the trial at 28, I did not remember what healthy felt like. I hadn't been healthy since mid-2002 at only 13 years old, and it had been 15 years. And to experience the beginning of that only a few weeks after my device was turned on was disorienting in the most wonderful way. And for the 2 years that followed that trial from 2017 on, every 6 months it felt like a giant leap forward until eventually it evened out and my body just became blissfully normal and boring. And normal people don't think about what their body feels like on a regular basis. And eventually, I too stopped noticing mine, and that is a gift. For those wondering what it's like to live in my shoes or my Freebirds, Mark Twain said it best: life would be infinitely happier if we could be born at the age of 80 and gradually approach 18. I call it the Benjamin Button effect. And in the 8 years since my clinical trial, my body has reversed its own clock, and I have aged backward toward possibility. The only reason I'm here today is because of electricity, and this is not normal. But thanks to the people in this room, soon it will be, and the impact is going to be extraordinary. So I spent years watching how the world flattens people who are sick. Identity collapses into diagnosis, empathy turns into pity, and curiosity about someone's body replaces curiosity about their mind. But I was very lucky because I have parents who would never let me be defined by my limits, and they're here today. And my dad he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 19, and he never let it define him. And to the point where he put 100,000 miles on his motorcycle during his free time. And he is my favorite storyteller. His tales of rebellion and defiance shaped my stubborn soul into questioning the norms that others hardly notice, yet willingly follow. Meanwhile, my mom could turn an emergency room into a stand-up special. Her humor, even when she wanted to cry, taught me that sometimes a little dose of denial is its own kind of medicine, and that when that shoe doesn't fit on a dark day, a good mantra can go a long way. To have them here with me and Sean today means more than I can express, because from an early age, I knew that the physical pain I carried wasn't nearly as unbearable as the soul pain that they did, and watching their daughter endure what no child should. None of this journey was ever mine alone, and I have had more than enough applause in my lifetime from this, and I'd like to take a moment for us to applaud them. But I was thinking about how to describe what this trial could mean after, or what this field will mean after FDA approval. And the other night, Sean and I were in the living room working on this presentation, and we thought about calling it The World Without the Waiting Room. And what is that gonna look like, not just in my story, but for millions? What would it look like if disease was not chronic, but temporary? If diagnosis wasn't a life sentence? Over the 15 years of my illness, we've estimated that my insurance was billed probably $2 million in medicalization, or medications and hospitalization, sorry. Multiply that by millions battling inflammation today, and the millions who haven't even been born yet, who otherwise would have if it wasn't for all of you. What would that look like? What would that society look like in that culture? One that didn't have to, when people didn't have to endure the years of pain that so many of us had. When I got home from the trial, I realized I was living on a new frontier of medicine, one where electricity could restore what chemistry couldn't, and that blurred the boundary between body and machine, patient and participant, science and story. I knew my story could humanize the science, and in the space of great discoveries, I knew that that mattered a great deal. History is filled with milestones that showcase how first disbelief and then anger precede adoption when it comes to revolutionary discoveries that benefit human potential. The funny thing about the status quo is that it only appears stagnant. In its complacency, it becomes profitable, and that profit is why it becomes dogmatic. And those who benefit from it invest great sums in its preservation and fiercely defend its continued need. I didn't enter the field 8 years ago because I wanted to belong to it. I did it because I thought that I wanted more people to experience what it felt like to live in my shoes and not just white-knuckle their way through life, but actually live it. And I knew that someday, decades from now, if I didn't try, I would always have to wonder if I could have made a dent in its adoption or acceleration of translation. So that's what I did. At the Feinstein Institutes, I became the translator, the living proof of concept turned storyteller. I built and managed the patient database for clinical trials, wrote articles, fielded patient emails, and helped the team craft messaging for donors, policymakers, and the public. I spoke at conferences around the world, from Sweden to New York to Nashville, twice to DC, first to meet with the New York delegation, and then after that to meet with Senator Cassidy, who I like to say is a gastroenterologist by trade, moonlighting as a senator. And as the years passed, we all watched with so much hope and happiness as milestones were met and the field moved from phase 1 to inevitability. But the heart of my work was never at the travel or podiums. It was the patients and the people. Over 6 years, I spoke with thousands of patients. With every new patient story, I was reminded of the stakes, and that was some of them would not live to participate in a clinical trial that they so desperately sought, and eventual FDA approval. And as the years passed, I grieved every loss. I knew I couldn't save them, but my heart still wanted to, and it broke every time I couldn't. And I knew that translation was inevitable, but in the wake of the pandemic and the isolation that ensued, a new defender of dogma emerged, not driven by profit, but by identity. When the pandemic forced us into our homes and away from each other, our sense of community collapsed. Posts became our new front porch. Belonging shifted to trauma bonding over shared experiences, or shared grievances with followers rather than friends. In the terrain of online identity groups, Spoonies represented the online patient community. The metaphor came from this great essay by Christine Mezzarandino. Each spoon equals a unit of energy. Healthy people have an endless drawer of silverware, and Spoonies count every utensil before breakfast. It's a brilliant metaphor, and the majority of patients out there today still use the term as intended, to share the current state of their available bandwidth. and certainly not as a factor of their identity. But in the wake of the pandemic, the extremely online, as I like to say, redefined Spoonie from a measurement of energy to an unalterable framework of self. To be disabled became a badge of oppression, and the enemy became the concept of ableism. The dangerous consequence to that is that means that belong requires remaining broken. Rather than calling for better treatment options or cures, the focus was on to fighting the abled system. To heal meant to erase identity, not to expand it. But here's the thing. Identity, of course, is impacted by disease. Prior to vagus nerve stimulation, I knew really well how to be sick. It was learning how to be well that took practice. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is realizing when you no longer recognize the version of yourself who learned how to live in pain. I had to grapple with and unlearn the coping mechanisms that I developed for my survival. The overwhelming joy of having a body that now worked was exhilarating, but it was also terrifying. The dragon had been slayed, but now healing meant learning to see myself as something more than what I had survived. When I saw the way our culture transformed this concept of identity, I started to understand that when we let a single chapter define us, even a triumphant one, we miss out on the chance to find out what happens next, and the rest of the story becomes a cliffhanger. And I learned that identity is not forged in battle, it's forged in what comes after. In the summer of 22, I was 33 years old, and I did my first and only round of IVF. And I subsequently learned at only 33 that I was already in perimenopause. We got just one egg, and in the 7 days after the retrieval, Sean and I waited for praying for what we called we nicknamed the little embryo that could. But on day 7, it couldn't. And even though it never made it beyond the dish, it was no less a loss. And that moment cracked me open in ways I didn't know a soul could crack. Beneath the grief was a very sudden, aching clarity, and that was that I needed to stop telling my story and go live it and see what came next. A month later, Sean and I flew to Nashville for a conference. Prior to my diagnosis, I always dreamed that that is where I would end up, writing songs, singing, playing my guitar, and chasing a version of myself that I never got to meet. While there one night, we went to Tootsie's, which is a famous bar on Broadway, and after working up the courage, I handed the singer $20 and asked if she'd sing a Shania Twain song with me, and she said yes. And in that moment, under the purple neon lights of a Nashville bar, my whole nervous system lit up again. The day after we flew home, we bought a couple of guitars, and we have been playing every day since. And in the grief of realizing that we couldn't become parents in this lifetime, we needed to create something else, a different kind of abundance. Rock bottom became the foundation for which I could rebuild my existence. 6 months later, I left the field of the wandering nerve because I wanted to be known not only for how I healed, but also for how I lived. What happens, though, when the story of resilience starts to feel like something you need to overcome, and where do you start? You wander into the wilderness with a broken heart and terrified, and you learn that courage is not the opposite of fear. It is the companion that walks beside it. So I started building and refinishing everything I could get my hands on because I couldn't sit still. And Sean has no more wood left in his workshop because I've taken it all. But when I was a kid, though, I could not tell either of my parents that I was bored. My mom's response was, "Do you want to dust? Do you want to vacuum? Do you want to weed the front walk?" I was like, no. My dad, being the good Irish Catholic boy that he is, would respond with, "An idle mind is the devil's workshop." I didn't know I still don't know whether or not that's true because I was always too afraid to find out. But I can tell you that continued motion has certainly worked for me. Because it turns out that new purpose evolves from forward motion. putting your boots on every day and getting offline and getting to work. It's the place where you stop performing resilience and you start living it. But I started on the real path to rediscover mine on one night when Sean and I were up in the attic and we were organizing, and he found my first guitar in the corner, and it was collecting more than 20 years of dust. I started playing prior to my diagnosis, sometime around 12, and I stopped shortly after when arthritic hands no longer allowed. And the next morning, right before I woke up, I had a fleeting dream about refinishing it. So that's exactly what I did that day, and I fell in love with the process. Restoring old guitars became my therapy, and it turns out I was actually just restoring myself. Then came a message from a childhood friend. Could I refinish one of her late father's guitars as a gift for Zach Bryan? She would be traveling from Jersey to Texas for the Highway 30 Music Fest that October, and she wanted to present it to him. I was very concerned regarding my own lack of experience and the incredible responsibility to not screw up her late father's guitar, so I said no. And she did not take no for an answer, though, so I said okay. And in the time that I worked on that, I realized that maybe I had found something else I could wander around to. So she gave that to Zach maybe it was a year ago. I don't know, October of 24 maybe, or 23. Yeah, it's been a while, but that led to moving beyond restoring old guitars to building new ones. First for Cody Jinks, and then to Josiah from Josiah and the Bonnevilles, and then to Morgan Wade. Emily Dickinson said, "I am out here with lanterns looking for myself." And that's exactly what I was doing. Through the work of now able hands, I mended my broken heart. For years, I told the world how bioelectronic medicine saved me, and now I just show it with sawdust under my nails and music in my soul. For 6 years, I told my story online to help others find hope. When I chose to turn a new page, I wanted to ensure that the work that I did could still benefit those who might need it. My Vegas Nerve Girl website and Substack remain active as resources with essays that explain my change of course. I didn't think I needed to provide more of an update than that. After all, you saw the videos. I was posting videos and pictures of me working in my studio, building guitars on my feet all day, and doing the kind of work that could only be done in a fully functioning and healthy body. So I didn't think that regular state of remission announcements were required, because the proof was in the living. But when I began posting my hands building instead of my body healing, the algorithmically conditioned observers experienced cognitive dissonance. The era of social media reduces multidimensional humans into serialized archetypes. People had learned to access my world through a single lens, and that lens was Vegas Nerve Girl. And I liked her a lot, but I wanted to see who else she could be. And turning a page became a disruption in their storyline, but not mine. Soon I was getting messages wondering if I was still okay. And it was very confusing and honestly kind of jarring to see that so many assumed that if I wasn't narrating my health, I must have lost it. That's the strange unintended consequence of digital storytelling. When people consume your life as content, they feel entitled to its continuity, and they get very confused to find out that you're anything else. It's kind of like seeing the teacher outside of the classroom. And you're like, you are allowed out here? I didn't know you were. But healing is not a performance. And sometimes the truest measure of recovery is no longer needing to prove it. When Sean and I went to see Bruce on Broadway, he started the show with one line: "I'm here tonight to provide proof of life to that ever-elusive, never completely believable, particularly these days." And that is what I'm doing today. I'm here to provide proof of life. So when we get on the road to wherever it is we think we're going, we encounter all kinds of detours along the way. And sometimes they cause our dreams to change shape. And eventually we find out that the detour was the destination all along, and our unanswered prayers helped us find our way back home. Nevertheless, along the way, we grieve old versions of ourselves while we make room for the new ones that we have yet to become. And sometimes that feels like saying goodbye to an old friend. I have lived 1,000 lifetimes in only 36 years. And during my time out in the wilderness, I spent a long time grappling with how to fuse all the parts of me into one person until I realized maybe I don't have to. Maybe I can let all those versions of who I used to be hitchhike along the way and join me while I wander on. Our bodies are electric, our stories are too, and every branch and every scar and every synapse is part of the same current, and that is the circuitry of who we are becoming. And that is why the field of bioelectronic medicine is so revolutionary, not just because it resets the body, but because it resets life too. Over the last 8 years, I learned that healing the body was the easy part. Healing the wiring that broke decades earlier, that's where the hard part starts. Humanity has never seen healing on this scale before, not like this and not so fast. Our brains do not have an evolutionary precedent to understand this, and it is very confusing. The field exposes the circuitry between pain, identity, and possibility. The physical healing wasn't the story. The story was what came after. To learn how to be well, to unfold, to build, to expand, to stick around for a while, and to become, and then do it over and over and over again. Last year, I found a handwritten note it was ripped from a corner of a page and left on a store display counter, and it said, "It is a joy to be hidden and a disaster to never be found." And I smiled because I know a little something about that. The vagus nerve is called the wandering nerve. It wanders throughout the body, connecting everything to everything else. And I love that because I'm a bit of a wanderer myself. And maybe we're meant to live that way. Wandering, connecting, never fully finished, but always in motion toward more life. I learned a lot during my time wandering out around the wilderness. I learned how to grant myself permission to get lost for a little while, and that solitude is not a synonym for loneliness, and that there is great value found in long stretches of quiet. I've learned that healing is not linear, and long after excess inflammation recedes, like a tide going out to sea, I found myself walking around the shorelines of my soul, wondering where to go from here. Thankfully, I've still got many miles to go, but I know that healing lives in the unbearable space between heartbreak and hope. And maybe getting lost to follow up isn't disappearance. Maybe it's discovery. Maybe it's where life begins again, because that has certainly been the case for me. I will always be grateful for this life that Sean and I have found out there because of a young boy who grew up and became a neurosurgeon and did something about that. It has been a privilege to be a small part of this new frontier. And in the meantime, if anyone needs me, I'll be in my workshop.